In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to install a memory module on a motherboard. Let's go over the installation sequence. Notice that on this motherboard, there's no CPU, as we're going to install the modules first. Know that you don't have to install components in this order if you don't want to, though. If you wanted to, you could install the CPU first and the memory modules later. It doesn't matter because neither one will work without the other, and they both have to be there before you can turn the system on. So, with that in mind, let's get into the installation. The first thing you need to do is find the motherboard's memory slots. For this particular motherboard, notice that the memory slots are located on both sides of the CPU slot. Before you start putting memory modules in, you first need to plan how you're going to install them in your system. That's where the motherboard documentation comes in. It'll tell you how the memory modules need to be installed. Generally speaking, you should populate the first memory slot first. How do you know which one is the first memory slot? Well, you can look either at the motherboard itself or check the documentation. Some motherboards label the first memory slot as DIMM 0 or DIMM 1. Other motherboards might name it Memory 0 or Memory 1, or potentially RAM 0 or RAM 1. One thing you can look for is the fact that many motherboards are manufactured so that the first memory slot is the one that's closest to the CPU. Now, that won't always be true, so once again, check your motherboard labeling or documentation if in doubt. Once we've identified the first memory slot, we can go ahead and start inserting memory. Let's install the first memory module in the first slot here. Before we do, notice that the module and the socket are both keyed. This key is slightly off-center. It's not in the middle of the module. That means you can install this memory module in only one direction. If you experience resistance when you're installing a memory module, don't force it. You have to be sure that you've got it oriented in the right direction. I've got the alignment right, so I can just slide it down into the slot, give it a very gentle, uniform pressure until it clicks. When it does, the two tabs on both ends of the slot should automatically move up and lock the module in place. With the first module installed, the next issue you need to be aware of is where the second module needs to go. This is assuming that you're installing more than one. Now, the reason this is important is because there are rules as to where the second, third, and fourth modules have to be installed. Here's the key thing to remember. If you install a single memory module, the system will use that memory, but it'll do so in single channel mode, which is really slow. If you install multiple modules in the wrong slot, or modules of mismatched sizes in the right slots, the system will also run in single channel mode. As I said before, that's really slow. You can really speed up performance by configuring your system memory to run in dual, triple, or quad channel mode, depending on what your motherboard supports. To do this, the memory modules have to be installed in matching sets, having exactly the same capacity and exactly the same speed. Preferably, the modules should be the same make and model from the same manufacturer. The way you install them will depend on the number of memory channels supported by your motherboard and the number of slots available. For example, if your motherboard supports a dual channel configuration and has 4 memory slots, you'd install 2 identical modules in the first set of slots. If your motherboard supports a dual channel configuration and has 4 slots, you'd install 2 identical modules in the first set of slots. Many times these slots aren't right next to each other. Typically in a dual channel configuration, you'd install one module in DIMM slot 0 and a matching module in DIMM slot 2. Then, only if you wanted to, you could add a second set of matching modules in DIMM slots 1 and 3. But, like always, you should check the documentation to determine how the slots should be populated on your specific motherboard, because it does vary. A key thing to remember is that memory modules in the same set must be identical to each other, but you typically can use different capacity modules between different sets. For example, in a dual channel configuration, you could use 2 4 GB modules in the first set, which would be installed in DIMM 0 and DIMM 2. Then you could use 2 2 GB modules in the second set of slots, in DIMM 1 and DIMM 3. This would provide a total of 12 GB of RAM in the system. The same rules apply if your motherboard supports triple or quad channel memory. The difference is in the number of modules required within each set. With the dual channel configuration, we have 2 identical modules, right? With triple channel memory, you have to install 3 identical modules at one time. And likewise, if you're working with quad channel memory, you have to install 4 identical modules at a time. Most motherboards color the memory slots to indicate how they should be installed. Usually, all the slots belonging to the same set use the same color, but not always. This motherboard supports quad-channel memory, so we're going to have to install 4 identical memory modules in these 4 slots. Let's install the first one. I first orient the module in the correct direction. Then I push it all the way down until the tabs pop up. These tabs are important because they indicate, first of all, that the module is properly seated, but they also serve to hold it in place so it doesn't pop out. Next, I'll install a quad-channel system. After I install the first memory module, I then install 3 more identical memory modules in these other 3 motherboard slots. With the memory installed, the next task is to verify that it's working as it should. Before you can do this, though, you have to have a CPU and a CPU cooler installed in your system. Once they're installed, you then plug the system power supply in and turn it on. Next, access your BIOS or UEFI firmware configuration. You want to make sure that the memory was detected correctly. There are several different things you should look for. For example, if you installed 16 gigabytes of RAM in the motherboard slots, check to see that all 16 gigabytes were detected. Second, check the channel configuration. In this system, we configured a quad channel configuration. We should check the firmware and make sure that the memory is actually running in quad channel mode. If it isn't, I need to start doing some troubleshooting. Maybe I have a mismatched module in the set. Maybe I put a module in the wrong slot. Maybe I need to manually enable quad channel mode in the firmware configuration. Also understand that it's possible to encounter bad memory modules even if they're brand new. That's it for this lesson on memory module installation. Today we installed a memory module in the motherboard. We located the memory slots on the motherboard, determined how the slots should be populated, and then we inserted the memory modules into the appropriate memory slots.